enjoy. Mark chapter 16 this morning. Mark 16, we will be there in just a moment. And today we begin our new teaching series called Breakthrough. Most everyone finds themselves in a situation at times facing things that it just seems like you just can't get through. You can't get over. You can't get past difficult situations to get around. And over the next few weeks, we are going to begin to look at this idea of breakthrough, and we're going to begin to look at the Scripture and see how we can break through what is essential to break through some areas in our life as it relates to our faith, as it relates to our families, and in our church. And so I hope that you will join us for that. But I would say again that there is no situation that is representative of a breakthrough more than Easter. Easter is God's greatest reminder that He has the power to overcome every obstacle. He has the power to overcome every difficult situations. I've had my difficult situations. No doubt you've had your difficult situations. But regardless of how bad they were not as bad as Jesus' situation. We mentioned this last week. Regardless of how bad your situation was or is, or mine was or is, none compares to the situation Jesus found Himself in. Let me just make sure, have any of you ever been dead for 3 days? All right? No one here? Anyone ever decided, you know what, I'm about to die, and you were dead 3 days and then came back to life? And not only come back to life, but be in perfect health. After being beaten, killed, and the mortician putting on the funeral clothes that Jesus no doubt had picked out, putting Him in His casket, if you will, and putting Him in the ground, He arose. After 3 days in the grave and then getting up and living again. That's about the most impossible situation I've ever heard of. What about you? Can any of you, I don't know that I've ever met anybody that can one-up 3 days in the grave, all right? I mean, I've talked to some braggers, and I've talked to some people that don't matter what story you tell, they got one a little bigger, you know. Whatever fish you caught, they caught one bigger. Whatever trouble you've got, they've got one worse. I don't know of anybody else that can say, well, yeah, 3 days, I was in there 4. You know, I don't know of anybody that can do that. So Easter is a reminder that God has the power to overcome horrible, difficult situations that we can break through. Some time ago, my family and I used to watch a television show. It was intriguing, called I Shouldn't Be Alive. It's this series about people who were caught in difficult situations and they should have died. Well, if there has ever been anyone that we could say shouldn't be alive, it may be, in one sense, it could be Jesus after 3 days in the grave, but He is alive. And because He is alive, we can live again and we can have true life in this world and in the next. As a result of that, we have a hope for this life and the next life. We can overcome and break through areas that we're stuck in our faith and in our families. And today I want to begin with a message that I've entitled, What a Difference a Day Can Make. You ever said that? Wow, what a difference a day can make. I mean, one day you feel terrible and the next day you feel better. One day you feel good and the next day you may feel terrible. 24 hours can make a huge difference. 1,440 minutes can change a lot of things, some good and some bad. In 24 hours, your life can change from being single to married. In 24 hours, your life can go from being married to single or widowed. You can go from not being a parent to being a parent. However, there's even a more significant day than all of these. There's a day that not only 24 hours that can change your life, but the 24 hours that I want to talk to changed everyone's life. You see, my life can change in 24 hours, and it may affect me, it may affect my family, it may affect a few other people, but there was a 24-hour period that changed everything. You ever made that statement? Well, it'll be better tomorrow. Sometimes around our house when things, when I'm discouraged or something goes wrong and it's late at night and I'm tired, I'll say something like this: I'm going to go to bed. And I usually make this statement: sometimes the difference between hope and despair is a good night's sleep. And as I thought about this message this week, there really is a good night's sleep in these people's lives that changed their world from hope or from despair to hope. And so this morning we want to look at some of these. I want to look at a few individuals in the story of Mark chapter 16. We're not going to read the entire passage. We're going to look at just a few verses here and there. But I want to talk to you about the difference the resurrection makes. What difference does Jesus Christ rising from the grave make in your life and in my life and in the world as a whole? If you're following along in your notes, let me give you 3 or 4 things this morning. Number one, the resurrection, the difference it makes, we can find grace where we once felt guilt. We find grace where we once felt guilt. Notice with me in Mark chapter 16, verse 7. The Bible says, Jesus is speaking and he says, go, tell his disciples, or the angel says, but go, tell his disciples, and notice these 2 words, and Peter, that he is going before you to Galilee. If you underline in your Bible, I would encourage you to underline those 2 little words, and Peter. They're significant. Go tell the disciples and Peter. Wasn't Peter a disciple? Wouldn't he be told in the first place? Doesn't that seem ironic that the angel would say, go tell the disciples? I mean, he could have just said, go tell the disciples. That would have took care of Peter. But the angel said, go tell the disciples and Peter. There's a significant reason, I believe, that the angel said that, and it's this truth. Because of the resurrection and because of what Jesus has done, we find grace where we once felt guilt. Why didn't he say, go tell John? Go tell the disciples and John. Go tell the disciples and Thomas. Why Peter? Because really Peter was the one central figure that had really blown it. He was the one disciple. All of them denied him, but Peter was the one disciple that had voiced his assurance to Christ. I will never deny you. I will never leave you. I will die before you. Listen here, Lord. I know that you think these other. I got some questions about these other guys here myself. I don't know if they'll go all the way with you, but I see some problems with them. But the one thing you can bank on, Jesus, I'll be here, buddy. And if they take you, they'll take me. If they string you up on the cross, don't you worry, I'm going to be right beside you. He was a big mouth. Peter was great at opening his mouth and sticking his foot in it. He had the foot-shaped mouth. And the angel said, go tell the disciples and Peter. Why? Because the Lord wanted Peter, of all people, to understand, listen, don't get caught up in your guilt. There is forgiveness for what you've done. There is grace for you. I no doubt Peter had probably heard, or Peter probably would have thought, I know he arose, but I just can't face him. I can imagine Peter asking himself, how could I have done that? I said that I would never deny him. And I not only denied him, I didn't do it just once, I denied him 3 times. Man, I can't believe I did that. Peter's questions could have been, if I'd only stood up for the Lord, If I had only kept my promise. If I had only done what I knew I should have done. If I had only. You ever said that? If I had only. You see, our hearts and our minds are filled with the if I only. And you know what Easter says to us? The difference a day can make? The difference that day makes is that Jesus comes to us and He says, you don't have to have all of the guilt. I extend to you grace. The things that we said or did or didn't say or didn't do. You see, most of our failures, some are chosen and open, but some we would redo. We didn't necessarily mean to. And that's the idea in this. Let's say Peter lived today for just a moment and he had to deal with his guilt. He might tell someone how bad he felt and what he was working through. And different people would have told him different things. His friends probably would have said, oh, Peter, don't worry about it. We all make mistakes. Oh, don't really worry about it. We all make mistakes. His therapist would have said, well, let's talk about it. Sit down here, lay down here, and give me your checkbook, and lay down here, and let's just talk through this and tell me how you're feeling about all of this. The positive thinkers would have said, Peter, don't worry about it, as long as you learned from it. Church leaders would say, well, just do better next time. But Jesus says this, I forgive you. You know what go tell Peter really means, translates in our language? I forgive you. And the difference that day can make is that Peter received forgiveness. And now all of us carry around guilt. I love what Max Lucado said. He said, our mistakes come as pebbles, small stones that serve as souvenirs of our stumbles. We carry them in our hands, and soon our hands are full. So we put them in our pockets, and soon our pockets bulge. We place them in a bag and put it over our shoulder, but the burlap scratches and chaps. And soon the bag of yesterday's failures is so heavy we drag it. And nothing drags more stubbornly than a bag of failures. This morning, do you have a handful? Or are your pockets bulging? Or do you have a burlap sack full of them that you're trying to carry or pull along behind you? Where whatever amount of failure and guilt that we have, I want to remind us that the resurrection says there is grace to replace our guilt. We're a guilt-ridden people. I was reminded of that this week as I read about the Conscience Fund. Anyone ever heard of the Conscience Fund? You may not be aware of this, but the U.S. government has what is known as the Conscience Fund. It began in 1811. And literally, the U.S. Conscience Fund has received thousands of letters and have deposited nearly $6 million into this Conscience Fund. An average of better than $45,000 a year come into this fund where people send money out of their guilt for things that they have done wrong. And many of these letters are interesting. Let me share some of these. Here are a few of the actual letters to the Conscience Fund. February the 6th, 1974. I am sending $10 for blankets I stole while in World War II. My mind could not rest. Sorry I am late. And XGI with the postscript, I want to be ready to meet God. One woman in Colorado sent 2 8-cent stamps to make up for having used a stamp twice. A former IRS employee mailed $1 for 4 ballpoint pens she had never returned to the office. Here's my personal favorite. Dear Internal Revenue Service, I have not been able to sleep at night because I cheated on last year's income tax. Enclosed, you will find a cashier's check for $1,000. If I still can't sleep, I will send you the balance. You see, all of us are weighted down with things we have done in the past, but Easter says that our guilt is replaced with grace. Second, look at chapter 16, verse 12. And after these things, he appeared another form to two of them as they were walking in the country, and they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Secondly, sadness is replaced with gladness. If you read this passage and you go over to Luke chapter 16 and verse 20, Luke's account is that these two disciples were walking along, and Jesus walked up beside them, and they didn't even recognize, and they began to talk, and suddenly Jesus disappeared, and all of a sudden they realized that this was Jesus who had that they were walking along. And Luke tells us these disciples asked this question: did not our hearts burn within us while he walked with us and talked with us along the way? And the point is that these guys were so excited, they go back and tell everyone about what they had just experienced. And the point is that because of Easter, our sadness can be replaced with gladness. These guys were walking down the road and they were discouraged because they had no hope. But because of Jesus showing up and because of Jesus living, they found hope. And so sadness is replaced with gladness. Third, we find peace where we once felt panic and fear. Notice with me in chapter 16 again, verse 6. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. We find peace where we once felt panic. Are you fearful today? Do you have fears about this life? Do you have fears about the next? The word literally means, the word do not fear or do not be alarmed literally means do not be thrown into terror. There's a lot of people who live their life just fearful. I found something interesting this week that it was fascinating. There is what is known as the phobia list. It's a list of all of the phobias that are there. Let me give you some of these that I found. Theophobia, the fear of God. Pretty natural. But what about this? Phobia. That's the fear of fear. That just seems a little redundant to me. Here's one. Some of you may have this. I don't really know how to say it, but arachnobutyrophobia, that's fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. Any of you got that right here? All right. Okay, one. All right. The fear of peanut butter sticking to. Panophobia, the fear of everything. I've met that person. You ever met one of those? They're afraid everything's going to happen. Guys, any of you got this? Gynophobia? Fear of women? Oh, yeah, if you knew her, you'd be afraid of her too. You know, some of you might say. Well, some of you might have this one. Homophobia. I sure hope Brother Randall's not going to preach a sermon today. That just tears me up. Fear of sermons. Oh, I knew it. I got to get out of here. He's starting that preaching again. Now, I know a lot of people have this one. Ecclesiophobia. Fear of church. They've never said it, but they must be afraid because they don't come around a whole lot, you know, whatever the case is. I just don't understand this one. Omplophobia, fear of belly buttons. I mean, can you imagine? Oh, my goodness. Can somebody get that away from me? That thing's scaring me to death. You know, fear of belly buttons. Here's one of my favorite. Cockamorphobia, fear of fat people. Can you just see it? Oh, that's a big one coming right there, man. Let's get out of here. Well, how are we going to get away from this one? You know, I mean, fear of fat people. Now, I like this one. I think this is pretty normal. Ballistophobia, fear of missiles or bullets. I never realized I had that, but I do. I'm a little afraid if somebody says they're going to shoot me. I mean, I have a natural fear of that, all right? Some of you ladies, you might have this, fear of pregnancy. Here's another good one. Cocophobia, fear of ugliness. Well, I'm going to tell you that one right back here. Now, I'm not pointing any of y'all, all right? But you leave out of the house. Oh my goodness! I hope I don't see no ugly people today. Oh, good. That scares me. Here's one. I couldn't believe this one. This is actual stuff. I'm not even going to try that one. But it's the fear of long words. I thought, now that is the most fitting word for fear of long words that I could ever come up with. And so as I read these this week, I was just reminded of the fact that we live a life of, so many people live a life of fear, and I just thought to myself, I'm afraid I don't understand why people have all of these fears. But I do understand this, because of the resurrection, we don't have to live in fear. We don't have to live in fear about today. We don't have to live in fear about tomorrow. We don't have to live in fear about 10 years from now or 100 years from now. If we know Christ, He has everything under control. We don't have to live in panic. We can live under His promise. And let me give you the last thing this morning. That the difference a day can make. We have hope of heaven instead of hell. We have the hope of heaven instead of hell. Look at Mark 16, verse 16. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whosoever does not believe will be condemned. You see, the difference a day can make is this. Where we had no hope of heaven, now we do. Where we once were isolated and away from God, now we can be close to Him. Where we once hoped that we could live in His presence, now we can be assured that we will. You see, that's the good news. And Jesus tells His disciples, go out into the highways and into the hedges. Go into all the world and share the good news. What is the good news? The good news is Easter. It is that Jesus died and was buried and on the third day arose. That is the gospel. That is the good news, that because Jesus lives, we can live. Not that we can live here on this earth forever, but that we can live eternally. And where once we were bound for hell because of our sin and we were away from God and we had no hope, without Jesus we have no hope. But because of the resurrection, we do have hope. And it doesn't matter how big your pile of sin is. It doesn't matter what the sins may be. It doesn't matter how long you've lived in sin. Because Jesus died, we can be forgiven. But I want to tell you this. He is the only hope we have of heaven. It is not Jesus plus this. It is not this, and if this doesn't work out, Jesus will come along and help. It is Jesus. I've said before, today is the difference in Christianity. This is the number one reason today why we are Christians, why I believe that Christianity is true, is because we are the only one who serve a risen Savior. And if Jesus rose from the grave, then everything else that He said is true. See, if He didn't rise from the grave, then just throw it away. It's all a lie. But see, if He did rise from the grave, then everything else that He said is true. And if He said He was God, then He is God. And if He said He is the only way, then He is the only way, because He is the only one that ever got up from the grave after 3 days. See, that's the difference. And that is the only hope of heaven. Not if I can live a little better, not if I can do better, not if I can give more, not if I can go to church more, not if I can be a little more moral. The answer is this: I cannot do it on my own. Jesus, You paid for my sin. You took my punishment. I am going to trust You. You took on my sin on the cross. I'm going to take on Your righteousness so I can stand before God. That's it, folks. That's the only hope that we have of heaven. I like what Timothy Keller said. He said at the end of creation, God said, "It is finished." And He rested. And at the end of the crucifixion, Jesus said, "It is finished." And we can rest. You see, before Jesus, everybody's busy, trying to sacrifice and doing all of the rituals and killing all of the lambs. But Jesus said, "It's finished. No more need for any more lambs. No more need for any more bulls. No more need for anything else. I am the ultimate perfect sacrifice. It is finished." And we can rest in the finished work of Christ. Matthew Huffman was a 6-year-old son of a missionary to El Salvador, Brazil, or Salvador, Brazil. One morning he began to run a fever. And as his temperature went up, he began losing his sight. His parents raced him to the hospital. And as they were driving to the hospital and little Matthew was lying on his mother's lap, he did something that the parents will never forget. He extended his arms into the air. And the mother reached and pulled his arms down, and he extended his arms again into the air. Confused, his mother said, "Matthew, what are you reaching for?" In his words, his mother said, "I'm reaching for Jesus' hand." He answered with those words, and then he slipped into a coma that he never came out of. In our eyes, that's a tragic story, and no doubt it is tragic for a parent. But what I want to share is the reality that Matthew learned something at 6 years old that some of us never learn in an entire lifetime, and that is reach out to Jesus. They never see Jesus' hand extended to them. And I want to tell you that the crucifixion and the resurrection and Easter is about Jesus extending His hand, saying, "You know what? I want to give you grace where you had guilt. I want to give you gladness where you had sadness. I want to give you hope and where you had fear. I want to give you heaven where you were once bound for hell." And the only difference is you have to reach back out to Him.